So today I'm joined by Chloe Bartle, who's the People, Performance and Culture Vice President at Unimarket. And thanks for joining us today.
My Faye, thank you so much for having me.
So we're here today to have you along to talk about all things people, culture, AI, and life in a fast growing scale up. We've been working at Tally with what was originally vendor panel for almost 10 years now and
Mm.
have sort of gone through from 6 people up to lots and lots of people through acquisition and now working with the Australian business and the international markets and the US business that is Unimarket. And the reason that I thought it'd be great to jump on for a chat today is because you're obviously working in the forefront of technology and you work with probably pretty highly demanding people who expect a lot out of the tech and the role that people plays in driving great outcomes. And you're also doing some really interesting things around performance reviews and using AI and sort of just reimagining how HR can be approached when it comes to sort of using just different ways to think about things and weaving together different tools. So really interested to have you along today to hear your thoughts and to, share it out with our community. So thanks for coming along.
No, I can't claim to be an expert on any of this, but I will share
No.
a bit of what we're doing and a bit of what we're thinking about.
And you've also worked in sort of pretty senior people roles across a few similar businesses in the past,
Hmm.
both overseas and in Australia. Out of the gate, we're going to talk about some specific examples today, but I just wanted to hear your thoughts about what are some of the kind of classic people missteps or big, like the blockers, not that there's anything wrong with the people themselves, but just some of those sort of classic people blockers that kind of get in the way of building great culture in sort of fast moving, progressive, scaling up kind of businesses. Anything that you've seen that sort of repeatedly caught your eye in the past?
Yeah, I think there's just so many things I think that are really symptomatic. But I think when you really break it down, it's when you're kind of scaling a culture and the things that get in your way, it's how are you giving people clarity in their roles? And that really for me is like the number one blocker. So how do people know unequivocally like what their job is? How do they know they're doing a good job? How can they make decisions? How are they progressing? And so I think the big blockers of when you're moving really fast is how can you give people that clarity? And then I think how can you give people clarity about how do they make decisions and who has like those who has the autonomy to kind of make decisions? And I think that's as you start to get bigger and things move really fast and people sort of and sometimes that needs to change. And I think it can become very unclear if you don't take time to define that, who kind of has that ownership. And that's where I think a lot of the kind of misstepping happens because people either kind of defer to others, they make decisions where they shouldn't, they don't realize that their role has changed or the expectations have changed. And I think that's when you really start to see people kind of running into walls and frustration happening. So I think, yeah, I was thinking about this and I was like, that is to me, like it's the lack of clarity and the lack of clarity around kind of decision making, I think is the really big one and something you really have to stay at the forefront of as a leader as as that business changes.
Yes, gotcha. And is it a lack of clarity because there's just a lack of clarity, or is it just because things are moving too quickly? Like, is it like what's the cause of that lack of clarity in your?
I think it's a combination of two things. I think it's the things are moving so quickly, and I think sometimes the leader, you're like, I'm just trying to stay ahead. I'm just trying to keep stuff going without actually taking the time to think about, well, what needs to change now? And I think like a lot of things need to change as you scale really quickly. I think there's like do you have the right people in the right roles, including your leaders? Because like what you need at 10 people is dramatically different to what you need at 100 people in terms of kind of your leaders and their capabilities and the team that you have. So I think that, yeah, that is like a really big driver of it. And I think you need to take the time to, to think about like what is the plan here and what is the strategy even if and it's not about being kind of crystal clear on what the 5-year plan is because you can't be like it's just impossible especially like in this world of AI, but it's
Mm,
about being very clear, like direction that you're going in and going, I need to get from point A to point B. So to get from point A to point B, like these are the things that I need to do. But then also, I think, as businesses grow very quickly, it's also, taking the time to then start to bring your team along for the ride. Because when you're a team of 10 and you're a founder, you can make all those decisions. When you're a team of 100, you don't know everything evermore. Like, and it's not your job to know everything. It's your job to kind of have the vision. It's then your job to then talk to kind of your leadership team or your managers underneath you to be like, how do you think I should actually go about doing this? What do you need from me to be able to get this thing done because they know, like they know better. And if you're hiring well into your team, like they know better than you, and so they should. And
Yeah.
I think that is one of the real missteps as a company grows very quickly, especially from that small size kind of up to, kind of 300 people. Like that is where I think a lot of the missteps happen, is that kind of letting go and kind of shifting the level of like responsibility and being like, I now need to step away from this. I need to give this to somebody else because they have a better idea than what I do.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And it's so hard to do when you're scaling up and all of the responsibilities been on you from day one to hold the decisions and to, hold this leaking bucket that's trying to
Mm-hmm,
fall apart
mm-hmm,
while you're trying to turn it into something that exists. And then to change that to say, I need to actually not even know who's sort of blocking the holes in the bucket anymore. Like it's just, I have to
mm-hmm.
outsource that now and give that to other people and
Yeah, and
and taking the
exactly that.
time.
And just to kind of be okay with sort of being like, I actually don't know anymore, so I need to hand this off to somebody else.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that is incredibly hard. And it's also hard as like a leader as well when people always kind of come to you, and then you need to be like, no, this business is now kind of too big or it's moving too quick, and so I have to give to somebody else. So I have to involve somebody else and
Yes.
know when to involve them kind of at the right time.
One thing that we're hearing from a lot of businesses that are starting to be more successful with the rollout of tech and AI is that they have stopped trying to tell people what to do with AI and started just watching what they're actually doing with AI
Mhm,
and just said,
mhm,
you guys know what you know your job and you're probably already doing this stuff secretly in the background that
mhm,
you may or may not be telling us, but that's the stuff that's helping you with your job. You're doing that because it's actually saving you time. So that's sort of like being able to have that kind of humility to trust that the people around you know what they're doing and to pause for a second. And not that it's not trust, but it just takes a lot of confidence and a lot of time and a lot of space for the humans that exist around you to let them step up into those roles as well. What have you
yeah,
seen from a culture perspective though? Because I guess when you
mm,
do go from 10 to 100 to 300, your culture also starts to fragment and you end up with a
mm.
culture to a sum of microcultures across the businesses. How do you what have you seen that's worked well to sort of maintain that cultural thread as you grow?
Think like culture, what's the definition of culture? It's like how we do things around here.
That's it. Yeah. Good.
And but I think actually for like me, what is culture and what is culture in a business is like how do we make decisions around here? Like that's for me, like that's kind of the really defining part about like what a business is all about. It's like how do we make them, like who makes them, like what work do we take on, do we not take on? Like what behavior will we tolerate and will we not tolerate? Who do we hire and who do we not hire? So that for me is like kind of what makes a culture. It's like it's the sum of all these little decisions that really then kind of creates like how a business operates. So and then I think, when you start to see it go wrong, I think there's lots of reasons for it, but very often it's because a lot of those decisions have become siloed. Do you know what I mean? And so you've got pockets of the business kind of making different types of decisions, or some people are really empowered to make decisions, others can't make any decisions at all. Some pockets of the business like really tolerate maybe bad behavior and others don't. And that's when things start to break down because there's a disconnect, right? It's like, well, this team kind of operate this way, and now, especially in kind of SaaS businesses, they're so interconnected. It's like, but how you operate is totally different to how I operate. And like, that's when a culture really starts to become kind of, messy and fragmented. There's not consistency and kind of clarity in decision making. So for me, that's kind of where I think this is, and I think I've really learned that going through this acquisition and bringing two businesses together, the
Mm.
power of people being clear on like where we're going, but then being empowered to kind of make decisions was kind of like a real shift that we made. And I think it has really kind of, and people being empowered to make decisions at lots of different levels of the business and, being accountable for those decisions as well. Do you know what I mean? It's not like you can just make decisions and then, not bear any responsibility. So taking on kind of more responsibility and
Mm.
more ownership of that, which at times is kind of quite scary, but having the ability to do it. But then being very clear at the top of like, this is fundamentally kind of what we expect of you and like what we do and don't tolerate. And having that, and then kind of allowing people and with those guardrails to then kind of go ahead and kind of make their own decisions about the work they do, what they say no to, who they hire, who they fire. That's how kind of the culture kind of starts to change and permeate.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's a really nice way to frame it as well. And it's something that, we've used a lot in innovation in the past and a few different things when you're trying to build a brand, even like a human brand or, an employee experience brand, but also just a brand, just generally a consumer brand, is sort of defining it not by what we do, but what we don't do, and sort of flipping
Mhm,
it around and say, we're going to call out things instantly when they aren't the way we do things around here. And
mhm,
sometimes that clarity can be really helpful for people. Like you can say a lot of good things like, we're innovative and we're progressive and we're empathy and, and they're really nice buzzwords to hang on to. But when you're really clear in saying we don't do that around here anymore, people go, okay, I get it now. And also
people
people
start and they pay attention.
and they pay attention, yeah, and also
Mhm,
they don't the people who do those things quite quickly realize that maybe they aren't fitting in anymore, and
mhm,
not that they need to leave, but just that they need to adjust, and it's just
mm,
it's a really simple thing, and there's some really interesting psychology behind it. As soon as you open a window or create a little crack of, like, maybe it's okay if they do that over there, people, like, water flows downhill. People just go to that, and they just follow those kind of social cues, and they behave poorly, which is pretty
mhm,
bad. But I think a
mhm,
big part of what you're saying, though, it sounds like it's really based heavily on self-awareness and shared awareness as well. Like people realizing that they're not just their behavior, like not just the job that they're doing, but they're also how they're presenting themselves and how they're
mhm.
communicating and how they're connecting with other people. And it really is a social environment, not just a workplace. And how are you, how do you find that leaders, no, sorry. And then also, like, the other thing that you're also talking about is taking a moment to reflect and think about things and pausing to think about, do we have the right people? Are they in the right
Mhm.
roles? How are they fitting? A lot of that takes a lot of, consideration, like actually pausing and considering things. And leaders are telling, well, everyone knows this, leaders today are busier and busier. Mental health's the lowest it's ever been. Satisfaction's the lowest it's ever been. Everyone's got more and more jobs to do. Even though there's all this really great tech and AI, everyone's working harder than ever
Makes it
before.
worse.
How do you, like, what are the things that you're doing to try to help people to do that, like, to facilitate it? Because I think it's easy to say, it's right, but it's easy to say, "Just hang on a second, let's have a think about this and see if it's working." They're like, "I'm too busy. I'm not gonna stop for a second and think about it." How do you help them pause, and how do you sort of get that kinda clarity about what really matters into their workflow?
It's so hard. I ask so much of our leaders. All they do is get like emails from me and
Yeah.
Slacks from me being like, and this, and then that, and then you have a reminder of this. And are you doing that? I
Yeah.
don't think I'm actually the best person, but I
So the
think
secret is ongoing harassment, is
the secret is ongoing harassment. That's how you do it. No, no,
Right,
no.
right.
It's such a hard job. It's such a hard job being a leader and a manager. I was saying to our CEO Phil the other day, I was like, it's just, it really is. It's the worst. It's a very thankless task, but it's an important one. And I think if you want to be a leader, kind of a leader in a business, yeah, it's sort of there's just kind of a level of kind of responsibility and stepping up that you need to do. And I suppose I'm not sure I've got a good answer of, how we're kind of doing it perfectly, but I think we definitely had some really good learns in kind of the last 18 months when we were acquired and merged together as two businesses. And you kind of had this, this ELT, this very kind of competent group of people who were technically very brilliant. There's a reason they're in their roles. They have very good instincts as managers, all this stuff. And we kind of worked really hard together to, come together with this kind of company strategy of where the business is going to go. We were so clear on it. And then I suppose, one of the mechanisms that we have, it is a really important mechanism, is that we had our engagement survey, and it was actually one of our lowest rated questions was around having confidence in the leadership team and having a clear understanding of like where the business was going. And we're
Mhm.
like, what? How
Yeah.
could this be possible? We've
Yeah.
done so much work. We've been so clear. But actually, what we hadn't really thought about was, well, how do we properly disseminate this information to the team and not just go, oh, here's an email about our strategy or, here's a slide about our strategy, but actually start to think about, well, how do we take the team along for the ride? And then how do we start to empower managers to kind of do the same as well? Because I think, you can kind of sit here as a leader and be like, it's so clear in my head. And so then kind of how do you sort of start to equip both your leadership team, but your managers and going, well, this is how we now start to like disseminate this information in a way that makes sense to people. And I think that's like a really important part of going, you're asking people to do a lot. So how do you kind of equip them in a way that that talks the language of your team. And I think it's a really tricky one. I think and then it's kind of some of it's, playing around with tooling. I
Mm.
think you know, like a tally is a really powerful tool for that. Whereas thinking about, well, how does this person take in information? So, if we need to put important information out to the business, yeah, it's important to have a town hall. It's important to maybe have like your quarterly management meetings. It's important to have kind of team goals. So those are some mechanisms that you kind of give your managers. But then I think there's also, it's like, but then how can you explain this in a way that kind of really resonates with different team members as well? And I
Yeah.
think that is some kind of the support that we give our managers. So you've got kind of those like high level kind of mechanisms that everybody has. And then I think, yeah, you can then start to experiment with like tools like Tally and be like, well, then how can you tailor this a little bit more in someone's one-to-one, for example, of being like, let me take you through, what we're doing this quarter and like how this kind of fits into your development goals and like why that's important to you.
Yes. Yeah, okay, that's really
So,
powerful. It's a real trend that we're seeing in HR technology just generally around like there's been this move from system of record to kind of engagement and giving people information and understanding to intelligence and sort of arming
mhm,
them with tools where they can now like it's sort of tailored to who they are, tailored to the situation, arming them with what they need to know in that moment so that leaders can kind of get that clarity. Because I guess, in the context of a leader being busier and busier, they also need to have faster and faster access to the right data to be able to act in the way that's going to be the best outcome. And all of the things that you said earlier are we just need them to be doing more of that. We need them to be doing like to be disseminating information better and like
mhm,
customizing it better and like do more and more, please. And so like there's interesting ways that technology can sort of support with those kind of things, and it is a real trend that we're seeing across the market, which is kind of fun. There's an interesting approach that you're bringing to performance reviews at the moment where you're sort of threading AI
mhm.
process and outcomes together. Are you able to give us a really quick high level of like what that looks like and the process? Because I haven't seen it before and you might not think that it's that interesting, but I haven't seen the use of like AI and Tally and a whole bunch of things that you're threading together into to try to really nail that message home. And which I believe isn't necessarily about performance communication. It's more about like how the two humans connect with each other during the
Mm.
performance moment. Is that how you describe it? And tell us about it.
Yeah, well, I think it's when I don't know if I'm doing anything particularly innovative. I'm like such a layman when it comes to AI. But I do think what's so interesting about it is I'm really excited by the prospect of like how it starts to change the role of like people in kind of rethinking work. And rethinking kind of how we do things and rethinking people's jobs. But also, I think, it's how can we start to improve like the experiences that we already do? I don't think we need to like blow them up, but, there's like I think for me, the reason that I thought about performance reviews is like people hate doing performance reviews, right? They're time consuming, like people don't like talking about themselves, people don't like writing about themselves, people find it difficult. It's just not people's favorite thing to do. And then also I think very often because people don't like doing it, often they produce like a lot of very average stuff, which then is also shit because it's like people, you come to these performance reviews, no one prepare for them, you get this really average feedback and then everyone hates the whole process and, it just sits there on this like PDF somewhere on someone's profile. It's dreadful. And so I was thinking a little bit about, well, how can I start to drive some of the behaviors that like I want to see or that I think make a good performance review and make like a review, like just more worthwhile, because that's what you want to know. Like comes back to that like clarity. I just want to know, I've worked really hard all year. Like, how am I doing at my job? Do I have any surprises coming my way? And like what does that mean for the next year? Like, am I going to develop? Do I get more money? Like what does that mean? Does it all kind of make sense to me? So we have started using Claude in the business, quite nascent in our experience, but obviously it's quite I think it's very powerful and kind of how it connects to a lot of tools. But I built a performance review writer. And I was like, well, that's cool. Like, you put some stuff in, you can put a brain dump and it gives you a review. But then I was thinking a bit about, well, why do we do reviews? And, what do you want to get out of them? And really you want to know, well, the stuff that I worked on last year, I worked on that continuously and we spoke about that. And, there's been some change and some development and I get some feedback on that. And then now I have kind of, another plan for next year that is kind of inspiring and makes sense to me. And so that's kind of how I thought about it. So the behavior that I kind of forced in my performance writing tool, I kind of forced a couple of behaviors. So one of them was like, what was last year's development plan? So you've got to have it, you've got to look at it. What is your brain dump of kind of the information that you want to give people? I was like, well, this is cool. Then what are some biases that we should check for? Because there's obviously natural bias that comes out in your performance review, right? Like the recency effect is a really obvious one. Or, you kind of have your like top performers who you kind of like, I think this person's a top performer. I've kind of got my favorites. So I don't, and bias comes through there. But then also, how can I then kind of land the conversation in a really good way? And so that's sort of how I kind of built the tool. So you dump in your development plan, you kind of get your brain dump, and then it gives you, your kind of nicely written review. And then it sort of says to you, hey, you sort of said these things. Have you sort of thought about this? Have you kind of checked this bias? This kind of, you said that this person is a strong performer, but you're kind of really lacking in some examples here. So how can you make sure that the kind of the quality of what you're producing is and the input of what you're producing is really sound? And then I thought about how I could use Tally, because then it's like, how do you like land that conversation with a team member in a way that kind of feels meaningful to them? And so what I kind of built was, some kind of preset questions around, kind of landing difficult feedback, really highlighting someone's strengths. And so I guess kind of Claude produces some slightly tailored questions that you can kind of some tailored questions that you can put into Tally, going, well, based on this feedback about this person, you're going to give some good feedback about this. So here's like a question that you can put into Tally. And so that's kind of like the output of what we got. But then I think the other really interesting thing was that our managers then started to play with that themselves. And so they've done kind of a couple of different things. So our managers have used it to, they've kind of put these prompts into Tally going, I need to give this person some really good feedback. How do I make sure that I'm kind of really amping them up in the right way? So Tally gives them like a really kind of insightful comment about them. But they've also started using that to go, well, that actually, how can I write something and how can I give them some written feedback that lands really nicely with them? Which I thought was like a really interesting approach and not one that I intended. And the other one, the other unexpected one was our managers have then started to think about, well, how can I use insights about these team members to kind of play back to them, like maybe like why they behave in that way and maybe why they struggle in this area. So we had someone, for example, who she wasn't adopting AI and kind of pushing herself in the way the manager had hoped that she would. The thing that was contradictory there was that she was actually someone who was very enthusiastic about new ideas. But what he discovered was she was very enthusiastic about new ideas, but had quite a low kind of risk appetite. And so really and had quite a bit of kind of self-doubt in terms of her confidence. So actually the manager could then like come into her performance review and be like, hey, you're kind of really good in this area and you've got some really good like enthusiasm, but I need to see you push more. But have you thought about the fact that actually you're enthusiastic, but you're not necessarily kind of that always confident in your new ideas? So like, how can we now work on that over the next 6 months? Which I thought was brilliant. And that was like an unintended consequence of kind of using Tally,
Super
but was
powerful.
for managers to kind of really dig into the why.
I think it just sort of really sets the tone, right? It's like if you arm leaders with the intelligence that they're looking for, then their curiosity is piqued, and then they start wanting to find
Yes.
out more because the way that a lot of like HR interventions have traditionally worked is like, hey, leader, come and hang out with us for a day. We're going to teach you a whole bunch of stuff and then you can go back and apply it.
Yeah,
Whereas
they
if
go forget
you
it.
sort of feed something to a leader in the flow of work and they actually use it
Mhm.
and they go, oh, that was kind of helpful. What's the next thing I can do? And then they just keep, and that's how humans learn, right? You don't learn from absorbing like the entire encyclopedia in one day. You learn by grabbing a little thing, trying it, seeing, adding it to your
Mhm.
kit bag, and keep going from there. And so those examples are beautiful. It's really nice,
Yeah.
and it kind of lines
Yeah,
up with my worldview for what it's worth, which is that leaders kind of want to understand their people better. They just haven't had the tools at their fingertips to be able to do that. And as soon as you give it to them, they're like, "This stuff's great. Thank you. Can I have more?" They're not.
yeah.
They don't want to be bad leaders, and they don't want to get the conversations wrong. They just haven't had the intelligence they needed to be able to do it. Not intelligence, just like the data to be able to do it. And so I love hearing those stories. Tell me more.
No, I've actually really enjoyed it, and now it's kinda like, okay, that was cool. So like now, like how are sort of the like kind of what's next for that? Like
Yeah.
how do we start to kind of bake this into kind of other parts of like the onboarding, the recruitment journey? Because again, you sort of go, oh, I think these are kind of some of the like the obvious applications of of Tally.
Mm,
But I think the really interesting piece of the performance review process was like giving managers a bit of a nudge and then
mm,
kind of watch them play with it and then kind of share, actually, I kind of did this thing, I repositioned questions this way, and like this was the outcome. The curiosity and the kind of then some of the confidence that I think comes with that as well. And then I think for team members, like how nice that someone has taken the time to want to understand like your why and want to give you, do you know what I mean? Like, and think like a little bit more about like who you are as a person rather than be like, yep, good job this year, kind of keep going. Like, how nice that someone's be like, I've noticed this about you, and like, I saw this in your Tally profile, and like, I've sort of maybe connected these dots. Like, does that kind of make sense for you?
Yeah, I love that.
Mm,
So good. That's so, yeah. Well, the reason why I thought that was an interesting case study is, well, one, even though you're saying you're not doing a lot with AI, what you just described then is actually miles ahead of most other companies that, you sort of hear about in the market. So it's sort of, I feel like once you start playing with AI, you feel like you're just getting started, but there's so many people who haven't got started yet. So it's interesting to hear
mm,
these case studies and to see how people are playing with it. But what I really love is that it kind of goes full circle back to what you were talking about at the start, which is that you need to give people clarity and understanding and set the context, and then let them be leaders within that. And as soon as you say, like in your example, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, this is why we're trying to get to a better outcome. Here are some tools. Find your own way in here that's going to work for you. And people grab it
mhm,
and then they start experimenting and they tailor it to the outcome that they're looking for and what they're trying to do for their team members. But you just have to, we don't have to solve problems for people. We just have to arm them with the things that they need and the context and the frameworks so that they
mhm.
can solve problems for themselves. And so I thought it was a really nice example.
Yeah. I think it just came out of sheer necessity, like I'm a team of one, right?
Yeah.
And I'm also fundamentally
I
think
love
probably a
it.
bit lazy. So I'm one
I love it.
person, I cannot be everywhere. So it's
Yeah.
like, how can you arm them with enough? Do you know what I mean? Where it's kind of like, this is the expectation. This is, how can you kind of arm them with enough sort of kind of tailoring and sort of nudging in the right direction that they then go and kind of do like the exploration themselves. Like they know better than me. They know their team better than me. They know how things need to be run better than me. And I think, and I think we've also been very lucky in the business that we have been kind of very empowered. It's exactly that. We're trying to empower our managers to go and like they're the experts. It's
Mm.
like here's like a framework, here's some direction. Now kind of go make the decisions that you need to make for your team. Yeah. And we're doing similar approach with AI, like where we just release the genie out of the bottle, right? We've just given it to everyone, be like, here are some guardrails, but go build and like see what you can come up with.
I love it. It's great. It's great. Awesome. Well, look, that's all I wanted to touch on today. I thought it was just a really nice case study and some really interesting perspectives to bring to other people in the community about what's happening in progressive, fast paced tech businesses like yours. So thanks for coming along and sharing your thoughts
Thank you
today.
so much for inviting me. I love talking about this stuff. So
Great. Let's do it again.
I'd love to.
Thanks very much, Chloe.